President, it is my great privilege to present to you Professor the Lord Ara Darzi of Denham for the 2013 Honorary Doctorate in Science of the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. Lord Darzi is a surgical oncologist who is currently the Paul Hamlin Chair of Surgery, Chairman of the Institute of Global Health Innovation at the Imperial College in London, and a Fellow of the Royal Society, the UK's most prestigious scientific body. Professor Lord Ara Darzi was raised in Iraq, of Armenian origin, his family having fled the genocide in Armenia in 1915. Having completed his high school studies at Baghdad College, he arrived as an undergraduate student at RCSI in 1978. Assessing the potential of students on admission is a dark art, but our legendary former registrar, Dr. Harry O'Flanagan, was no mean judge of talent, and in Ara's file, there's a note written in a firm hand dated the 30th of 5th, 1978, which says, "Dr. O'Flanagan is very interested in this applicant. Don't lose sight of it." It's fair to say that Ara fully enjoyed his undergraduate years in Dublin. In their 1984 yearbook, his classmates say that he was perceived as being calm and collected, but they knew better. As an undergraduate in his early postgraduate jobs, he was heavily influenced and guided by our own Professor of Surgery, Professor David Boucher-Hayes. In his department, David fostered a culture of continuous innovation, including the introduction of laparoscopic or minimally invasive surgery into Ireland. And while many surgeons wilted under the continuous culture of why or why don't we, Ara Darzi thrived in this atmosphere. He continued his training in Ireland, especially honing his research methodology and academic writing skills under the mentorship of our former president, Professor Frank Keane. At this point in the history of surgery in Great Britain and Ireland, the large teaching hospitals in London had missed the minimally invasive surgery revolution. And in their search for the best talent, Ara Darzi was recruited to London, subsequently appointed consultant surgeon at the Central Middlesex Hospital at the age of 31, an extraordinary achievement by UK and Irish standards, subsequently consultant to St Mary's Hospital in 1984 and to the Royal Marsden. He was subsequently appointed Chairman of Surgery at Imperial. Professor Darzi has become a world leader in the development of minimally invasive technologies for surgery and the use of surgical robots. He holds 6 patents for these and other inventions. He's the author of more than 600 peer-reviewed publications and over 10 books. And at a time when leading surgical researchers were concentrating on the molecular and cell biology of disease, Ara Darzi made the, at the time, extraordinary decision to focus his research on refining surgical technique. Professor Darzi pioneered virtual reality simulation for advanced surgical training. The training curricula that Professor Darzi developed have been shown to reduce learning errors, to improve team communication, decision-making and professionalism. Surgical precision and maintaining excellent standards were his priority. And in doing so, he has championed surgery. In the words of one leading academic, he has almost single-handedly ensured that the craft of surgery remained at the cutting edge of modern medicine. Building on this work, he created and leads the Imperial Centre for Patient Safety and Service Quality. Professor Darzi was knighted for his services to medicine and surgery in 2002. In 2007, he was introduced to the UK House of Lords as Professor the Lord Darzi of Denham and appointed Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State at the Department of Health. In his maiden speech at the House of Lords, he highlighted addressing inequality as his principal reason for entering the political fray, pointing out that the journey between Westminster and Canning Town on the Jubilee Line is just 8 stops, 20 minutes, a distance of 6 miles and a cost of £2, but the average life expectancy is 7 years lower in Canning Town than in Westminster. But what of the man behind the public success and the natural reserve? Those of us who know him will speak of his great kindness, his loyalty in the best clinical tradition to his old mentors and those he guides. Interviewed on BBC 4's Desert Island Discs, that one of his favourite songs is Peter Gabriel's "Don't Give Up," speaks of his quiet determination. The one book he chose to take on Desert Island with him was Yes, Minister, speaking to his sense of humor and self-deprecation. As a surgeon, as a scientist, and as a politician, Lord Darzi has had the ability to see the bigger picture, to challenge conventional wisdom, to stand up to vested interests, especially his own profession, and the courage to follow his convictions, always guided by his moral compass of what is in the best interest of patients. He is in every sense of the word a true leader, taking us in new directions before we knew that we needed to follow them. Thus, in recognizing his contribution to surgery, research, and service, I ask that you bestow upon him the degree of Doctor of Science, honoris causa.
By virtue of my office of President, it gives me great pleasure to award you with the third Honorary Doctorate of the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland.
If I can now invite Professor Ara Darzi, Honorary Doctorate of RCSI, to address the graduates.
Cathal, thank you very, very much for that most generous introduction. It's a great, great privilege to be here. And Chancellor, Presidents, members of councils, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for inviting me here today, but also it's a great, great honor for me to be addressing you for two main reasons. Firstly, it's a special day to you, and may I start heartily congratulating all of the graduates on this, one of the most exciting days of your life. To graduate from RCSI is a fantastic achievement, and one of which you, your family, and friends should all be very, very proud of. Secondly, I also feel very honored to share this experience with you and to receive my honorary doctorate from my home institution. It's just short of 30 years since I was where you are now seated. 30 years, and it's flown by, I could tell you. I found that graduation speeches follow a set format. Someone you have never heard of usually stands up, tries to find some words of wisdom, some good advice, and then tells you that you should find your own life's passion and follow it. I tried to see if I could remember my graduation speech and whether I acted on any of the advice that I was given. I asked my friends and colleagues, some of them are here in this room, the same question. The evidence will suggest that graduates rarely take the advice, or perhaps even remember it after spending the rest of the day either at Temple Bar or somewhere like that. The best advice that I was given, and that was about a year or so after I qualified, from one of the most distinguished mentors I had at the time, was not to do surgery. So what did I do? I ignored him. So I won't waste your time, as the one thing I could remember was the graduation speaker, who was a serious barrier between a thirsty crowd, warm, and a cold and refreshing drink. Not a safe place to stand. Actually, I'll tell you a lie, and I got one piece of advice, but I'm going to save it till the end of this talk. These speeches, as I said before, usually a great passionate plea for you to find your life's passion and to follow it. Well, you've already found it. You know your life's passion, you want to be doctors, and it's a done deal. That is at least 6 minutes of the standard graduation speech that I can't copy from someone else. So instead, I'm going to make few observations and tell you a few stories, They mean something to me, and I very much hope they mean something to you. Most of you will know me, or who I am, because what you've heard Professor Kelly inflated, a very inflated introduction, or because you were trying to politely pass the time by reading the program. It won't be long. Bringing the iPhone out of such an occasion is socially acceptable, but not yet. Maybe my name is a little familiar, but you're not sure why. It may be because you've heard when I became frustrated with the efficiency of bringing patients to the operating theatre, I decided to be a porter in my own institution. An interesting story that, and I remember going to the CEO of the hospital, and I had to get his pardon just in case I was caught in the corridors of the hospital and someone took me or locked me up for a mental illness of some sort. I got the pardon and I got the actual uniform, and I remember doing a shift on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. I promise you this, and this is something for you to remember. The minute I put the porter's uniform on, everyone who I've had for years, being the professor of surgery, huge contact with, within that hour, I've lost all that contact. I think the most notable one was my own students, actually. Having that porter's uniform completely disconnected me from that team, and I tried my best at the time to make that eye contact. I had a fairly busy shift, which went on. I remember one lady who was about 25, pregnant, seriously nauseated, took her to the obstetrics ward, puked on the way twice, arrived there, and the midwife gave me a serious bollocking on the day. Why did I actually arrive to the ward without actually calling the ward? So that patient-centeredness became a very important part of my career. The funny thing, at the end of the shift, about 3 o'clock, I went to the A&E to take a blood sample to the lab. And on it, being a clinician, doctor, I read what it said, and it said, group and cross-match, 4 units of blood because the patient has an upper GI bleed. So I took the blood, left it alone, end of the shift, changed into my clothes, went home, went to sleep by 3:30, 4 o'clock. About 6 o'clock, I got a phone call from the registrar on call, who reminded me something I completely forgot, that I was covering one of my colleagues who was taking his family to Gatwick Airport. And he said to me, I have a patient with an upper GI bleed. Sadly, he's bleeding. Could you please come and give me a hand, because I haven't done many of these. So I went in there, and I gave him a quick hand, and the operation was over about 7 o'clock. And then I went back home, couldn't sleep. About 9 o'clock, one of my distinguished gastroenterologists, and we have a president here who is of the same discipline, called me to say, Ara, he said, you're the professor of surgery, you need to be aware of this. Apparently there's a porter in the hospital who's operating on your patients. That is maybe the story you've heard. Or you may have heard that I was once called a goat, and you will be called all sorts of things in your career. Just remember that. Actually, I was called a tethered goat in the previous British government. You see, some people will tell you that when the English press aren't too busy hacking phones or bribing police officers, they spend their time inventing clever things, like GOATS, which stands for Government of All Talents. And it was Gordon Brown's attempt to bring some outsiders into his government. That's how I ended up being a health minister, which is why this is a wonderful job, because you always get to do the most important things. And I'm not talking about being a politician. I was asked to join the government because I was a doctor. And that was an amazing experience, as most cases, petrified when I started that. And part of that job was to take legislation through Parliament. And I'll tell you this second story. This was my first bill going through the House of Lords. And the civil servants give you a speech to read, and that takes about 20 minutes. And you can't really stand up and speak. You have to read it word for word. I gave my speech, and I realized there are 30 other peers going to actually contribute to this very important debate. The bill was about human fertilization and embryology bill, highly controversial issue, had moral issue, ethical issue, scientific and clinical issues. So I did my speech, I sat down, and about 8 o'clock in the evening, which is about 4 to 5 hours later, this very, very distinguished QC, and I'm not breaking any confidence, you've just taken the oath, this is all in the public domain, his name is Lord Brennan, stood up, an Irishman, very, very smart, and he essentially destroyed my speech and the actual bill in the most eloquent way. And you probably would realize in life there's a surgical way of saying things, and there's a very nice way of saying things. The latter is much more painful, as you've graduated now. And he sat down, and there was some other baroness who followed him from the northern part of this island, Baroness Paisley, who wasn't as eloquent speaker as her previous speaker. And as she was speaking, I heard a big thump. I could turn around and I see good old Lord Brennan, who's just given his fantastic speech, although a very painful one to me, has fallen on the red benches, and everyone was leaving the chamber, all the peers. And most of these guys are very senior people. I could see them from the corner of my eye. So the whole chamber was empty, and I jumped, as most of you will end up doing. You jump over the benches, went up to him, felt his carotid, and he was dead, stone dead, no pulse, nothing. There I was, finding myself about 20 whatever years later, after qualified, this is 2007, resuscitating this man who is a lawyer in front of the BBC cameras, which are still going live. And the last time I've resuscitated anyone would have been at St. Vincent's Hospital when I was a surgical house officer in the A&E department, which wasn't the most pleasant experience. So there we are, giving him a cardiac massage and a mouth-to-mouth, not a very pleasant thing to do. And 6 minutes into it, and nothing happened. So I screamed for a defibrillator, and guess what? The ushers walked in with the defibrillator, and I could see in front of my eyes my whole, not just clinical, political career, which I didn't really care about, but my clinical career was about to disappear. So about to shock him, I remembered one thing: look around just in case someone is touching your patient. And who do I see? I see someone wearing a white satin dress. It wasn't a saint. He was the Archbishop of York, who was the second in command in the Church of England. So at least he was separate from that. So I shocked this guy. And I shocked him. And I could tell you, as I put the defibrillator on, this thing started to talk to me, by the way, which I've never experienced before. This new defibrillators, the days I trained in the A&E department, these defibrillators didn't talk to you, but this one did. And this patient had a VF. I shocked him and I got him back. It was the most euphoric moment of my life. I could tell you that much. It was so euphoric that I turned around and I pointed at the Archbishop of York and I said to him, "I beat you." And I and you will every day in your life, almost every day of your life, get a feeling of that nature. And it's all the better because we do it together, whether it's porters and professors, and remember that, whether it's doctors and nurses, whether there are cleaners and consultants, whether there are surgeons and scientists. We celebrate, we mourn together, we can overcome our failures, and we move from our mistakes. We can shout about our successes and celebrate our victories because we've done them together. And remember that. You're not alone, certainly not in the era that you're going to be working in practicing medicine. Being a doctor is something to be treasured. It's not just what you do, it becomes who you are, a part of your identity. It gives you a place. It gives you your place with your friends and family. It gives you your place where you work. It gives you your place in society. And it's because it gives you place that means you should wonder. That place is a privilege, but it can breed lazy complacency. You've made it, why do more? Why not simply reap the fruits? The reason to wonder is the journey which is the part of my life. As you've heard earlier, I was born in Baghdad to an Armenian parents. I could have never imagined standing before you today. I came to Ireland to study, And there were very few people in 1978 who looked like me, and most of them were actually studying at RCSI. You very quickly build the Irish accent, as some of you have in this room, to the shock of your parents, including those who sent you into very expensive private schools in England. So quickly, befitting with the wonderful Irish sense of humor, everyone here has a nickname. So if you are Patrick, usually called a Paddy. If you are Ara, I was called Dara. If your surname is Darzi, it must fit into something, and in those days it fitted into Darcy. So very quickly, my nickname was Ara Darzi, the dark Paddy who graduated from surgeons, as you have seen today. I met my wonderful wife, Wendy, and we have traveled through life side by side ever since. With the exception of our Bichon Frisk dogs, my children, Freddie and Nina, are the best part of my life. But I digress, and back to the journey. I went to England for my specialist training. An Irish medical director who I worked for took a gamble, and I promise you it was a gamble, and I was appointed as a consultant at a reasonably young age, as you've heard, of 31. And these days, I would have been considered by my surgical colleagues and community as still being in my nappies. And the advice at the time was, don't do it. I did it on my own terms, took the job after completing my training. Following that, I came across the dean of a medical school who took a gamble and appointed me to the chair of surgery. I think, though, his master plan was to shut down the academic department of surgery by appointing me. As I had no formal training in academic surgery, I've never been a lecturer, I've never been a senior lecturer. But a bit like my cooking skills, I could cook, but I've never been a proper chef. Subsequently, a health minister asked me to review the healthcare for London, and you've heard some of the outputs from Professor Kelly. And then the Prime Minister took the greatest gamble of all by appointing me as a health minister. What is unique, as per my first challenging decision, the overall majority of people at each stage told me not to do it. However deep in there, I knew if I stick to the values and principles that I learned from this place and for some of the great people who I've worked for, it's all doable, and the threat can be made into a golden opportunity. And that's one thing you'll remember leaving Ireland. You can always turn anything on its head. But the point of the journey isn't to be carried along. It isn't to go along for the ride or hitch along with others. Life isn't a novel, by the way. It is an autobiography. You make choices every day, and you can choose to accept the world as it is or to shape it to what it should be. I've always been an outsider, and an Armenian in Iraq, an Iraqi in Ireland, an Iraqi-Irish in England, a doctor, not a politician, and an engineer, not a scientist and not a doctor. It's always made me question why. Why cannot they be different? I've never been armed, certainly, with any of these answers. I'm pretty sure I'm not the first person to quote a Kennedy at an Irish graduation ceremony, and I won't be the last. But when I reach a juncture, I often recall the famous Robert Kennedy quote. Some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not? Now, I don't quite dream these things, I promise you, at night like Robert Kennedy would have. But my career has been about embracing the journey, taking the unusual route, and always asking, why not? You never know where life will take you, but only you have the courage to know if you're moving forward and if you're asking the questions that matter along the way. You have achieved so much already, and you have so much more ahead of you. Promise is a special gift that slips away as life unfurls. Only you can fulfill it. On that piece of advice that I said at the beginning, I had one piece of advice, and it is watch where you step in hospitals, or look after your hospital porters, and always, always know how to work a modern defibrillator. Thank you.